In 1961, the Soviet Union stood at the pinnacle of space exploration triumph. Yuri Gagarin had completed his historic orbital flight on April 12th, cementing the USSR's dominance in the space race. Yet beneath the celebrated achievements lay a network of classified communications that would haunt the engineers and radio operators who intercepted them for decades to come. The Baikonur Cosmodrome stretched across the Kazakhstan steppes like a monument to human ambition. Within its restricted perimeter, concrete bunkers housed the most sensitive equipment of the Soviet space program. Among these facilities, Building 7 housed the primary communications array, a complex web of antennas and receivers designed to maintain contact with spacecraft during their orbital missions. Senior communications technician Vladimir Petrov worked the night shift in Building 7. At 43 years old, Petrov had spent nearly 2 decades monitoring radio frequencies for the military before his transfer to the space program. His colleagues described him as methodical, almost obsessively precise in his documentation. Every transmission, every burst of static, every anomalous reading found its way into his meticulously maintained logbooks. Radio operator second class Dmitry Volkov assisted Petrov during those long midnight hours. 28 years old and recently graduated from the Moscow Institute of Communications, Volkov brought enthusiasm to complement Petrov's experience. The two men had developed an efficient rhythm during their 6 months working together, dividing the monitoring responsibilities between primary and backup frequencies. The third member of their team, technical supervisor Elena Kozlova, arrived each morning at 0600 hours to review the previous night's logs. Kozlova, 35 years old and one of the few women in senior technical positions at Baikonur, had earned her position through exceptional skill in signal analysis. Her reports went directly to the program's highest levels, making her one of the most trusted voices in Soviet space communications. November 7, 1961, marked the 44th anniversary of the October Revolution. While Moscow prepared for the traditional parade in Red Square, the skeleton crew at Baikonur maintained their vigilant watch over the frequencies. The previous month had seen increased activity as mission planners prepared for future launches, but this particular evening began like countless others. Petrov settled into his station at 2300 hours, reviewing the frequency assignments posted beside his equipment. The primary communications band remained clear, with only the usual background noise common to long-distance radio monitoring. Volkov took his position at the secondary array, adjusting the sensitivity settings according to the evening's protocols. At 2347 hours, Petrov's equipment registered an anomalous transmission on frequency 121.5 MHz. The signal appeared briefly, lasting approximately 8 seconds before fading into static. Standard procedure required logging any unidentified transmissions, so Petrov noted the time, frequency, and duration in his logbook. The transmission itself defied immediate classification. Unlike the clean digital communications typical of spacecraft, this signal carried characteristics of human voice transmission. However, the audio quality made immediate identification impossible. Petrov adjusted his equipment, hoping to clarify any subsequent transmissions on the same frequency. Volkov noticed unusual activity on his monitoring station approximately 15 minutes later. Multiple frequencies showed brief spikes of activity, each lasting only seconds before returning to baseline levels. The pattern suggested systematic transmission attempts across a range of frequencies, as if someone were searching for a clear communication channel. At 0018 hours on November 8th, the first clear transmission emerged from the static. Petrov heard what appeared to be a human voice speaking Russian, though the quality remained poor due to atmospheric interference and signal degradation. The voice seemed to be requesting communication with ground control, using terminology consistent with standard spacecraft protocols. However, no scheduled missions were active at that time. According to all official records, no Soviet spacecraft occupied orbital positions capable of generating the signals Petrov and Volkov were receiving. The nearest active satellite maintained position on a completely different orbital track, well outside the range necessary to produce signals of this strength and clarity. Petrov immediately contacted his supervisor through the internal communication system. Technical supervisor Mikhail Komarov, the senior night supervisor, arrived at Building 7 within 10 minutes. Komarov reviewed the log transmissions and authorized continued monitoring with enhanced recording protocols. The three men maintained their vigil as additional transmissions emerged throughout the early morning hours. Each signal carried the same basic characteristics: apparent human voice communications in Russian, using space program terminology, originating from frequencies assigned to spacecraft communications. Yet no official mission could account for the source of these transmissions. At 01:42 hours, a transmission emerged with unprecedented clarity. The voice, identified as male, apparently mid-20s in age based on vocal characteristics, spoke clearly enough for complete transcription. The operator used standard call signs and communication protocols, identifying himself only as Cosmonaut Zero. The designation Cosmonaut Zero appeared nowhere in official mission records. Soviet spacecraft identification followed strict numerical sequences, beginning with specific code prefixes. No approved mission profile included the designation requested by the voice in the transmission. Yet the operator demonstrated intimate knowledge of correct communication procedures and technical terminology. Petrov transcribed the transmission word for word. Ground control, this is Cosmonaut Zero requesting status update on orbital insertion parameters. Telemetry systems showing nominal readings on all primary systems, requesting confirmation of mission timeline and next communication window. Komarov instructed his team to attempt response communication on the identified frequency. Volkov transmitted standard ground control acknowledgement protocols requesting identification, verification, and mission parameters. No response came. The frequency returned to static after approximately 30 seconds of silence. Over the following 4 hours, intermittent transmissions continued. Each communication followed proper procedures, yet none provided satisfactory identification or mission verification. The voice consistently used the designation Cosmonaut Zero and referenced mission parameters that matched no scheduled operations. At 0600 hours, Elena Kozlova arrived for her morning shift. Komarov briefed her on the night's unusual activity, presenting the complete log of recorded transmissions. Kozlova's initial reaction reflected standard protocol skepticism, but the quality and consistency of the recordings demanded serious investigation. Kozlova initiated contact with Mission Control Center in Moscow, reporting the anomalous transmissions through encrypted communication channels. Her report included complete frequency data, transmission timestamps, and preliminary analysis of signal characteristics. Moscow's response came within 2 hours. Continue monitoring and documentation, but restrict knowledge of the transmissions to essential personnel only. The second incident occurred on November 20th, 1961, during a routine monitoring shift. Petrov and Volkov had maintained heightened alert status since the initial transmissions, but 2 weeks had passed without additional anomalous activity. The previous night's shift had logged only standard background noise and routine satellite communications. At 22:15 hours, Petrov detected the familiar frequency signature that had characterized the earlier transmissions. The signal strength appeared weaker than before, suggesting greater distance between the source and receiving station. However, the basic characteristics remained consistent with the November 7th recordings. This time, the transmission began immediately upon signal acquisition. The voice, again identified as Cosmonaut Zero, commenced what appeared to be a standard mission report. However, the content of the communication contained disturbing elements that differentiated it from normal spacecraft operations. Ground Control, Cosmonaut Zero, reporting mission status, systems experiencing increasing anomalies, temperature regulation showing fluctuations outside normal parameters, atmospheric mixture readings inconsistent with standard configurations, requesting immediate consultation with technical support teams. Volkov attempted response communication, but again received no acknowledgement. The transmission continued for approximately 3 minutes before signal degradation made further communication impossible. However, during this extended communication window, several additional details emerged that deepened the mystery surrounding these transmissions. The voice reported orbital parameters that placed the supposed spacecraft in a highly elliptical orbit, extending far beyond the operational range of conventional Soviet launch vehicles. The described trajectory would require fuel capacity and technical capabilities exceeding anything in the current Soviet space program inventory. More disturbing were the physiological reports included in the transmission. Cosmonaut Zero described experiencing symptoms inconsistent with normal spaceflight stress, vision disturbances, auditory hallucinations, and temperature sensitivity suggested medical conditions that would have disqualified any candidate from flight status during standard medical evaluations. Kozlova's analysis of the second transmission revealed additional troubling elements. Signal analysis indicated the transmission originated from a distance significantly greater than any previously achieved Soviet orbital missions. The Doppler shift characteristics suggested movement patterns inconsistent with any known spacecraft trajectory. Furthermore, voice analysis revealed subtle changes from the November 7th recordings. While the speaker appeared to be the same individual, vocal stress patterns and speech rhythm had shifted in ways suggesting extended isolation and potential psychological deterioration. Moscow's response to Kozlova's second report arrived through special courier rather than standard communication channels. The sealed instructions directed Building 7 personnel to establish dedicated monitoring protocols specifically for the frequency range associated with the anomalous transmissions. All personnel with knowledge of the transmissions required security clearance verification and signed confidentiality agreements. The instructions also included technical specifications for enhanced recording equipment to be installed in Building 7. The new equipment arrived within 48 hours, transported by military convoy, and installed by technicians who provided no identification beyond security clearance verification. During the installation process, Petrov overheard conversations between the technical specialists that suggested similar installations were being implemented at multiple monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union. References to the zero frequency and orbital anomalies indicated the transmissions were being received at other locations, though coordination between stations remained classified. The third and most disturbing transmission occurred on December 3, 1961. By this date, the enhanced monitoring equipment had been operational for 1 week, providing superior recording quality and more detailed signal analysis capabilities. The technical team had also been expanded to include additional radio operators and a dedicated communications analyst. Dr. Alexander Petrenkov, the newly assigned communications analyst, brought 15 years of experience in signal intelligence and electronic warfare to the investigation. His preliminary review of the recorded transmissions had identified several elements that suggested the source might not be conventional spacecraft communications. At 23:32 hours on December 3rd, the monitoring equipment registered the strongest signal yet received from the zero frequency. The transmission quality was so clear that every word could be understood without enhancement, and background sounds within the supposed spacecraft became audible for the first time. What they heard challenged every assumption they had made about the source of these communications. The voice of Cosmonaut Zero remained consistent with previous transmissions, but the content had changed dramatically. Instead of routine mission reports, the operator appeared to be responding to situations not reported in earlier communications. References to external contact and atmospheric breach suggested emergency conditions aboard the supposed spacecraft. More unsettling were the background sounds audible during transmission pauses. Mechanical noises inconsistent with known spacecraft systems, atmospheric sounds that should not exist in the vacuum of space, and most disturbing of all, additional voices apparently speaking from other locations within the same vehicle. Ground control, Cosmonaut Zero reporting emergency status. Hull breach in Section 7 has been contained, but life support systems are operating below optimal parameters. Crew members 3 and 5 are not responding to communication attempts. Request immediate mission abort and recovery protocols. Dr. Petrenkov noted immediately that no Soviet spacecraft had ever carried 5 crew members. The largest crew configuration tested in the current program involved 3 cosmonauts, and those missions remained in planning stages for future implementation. Yet Cosmonaut Zero's transmission clearly referenced a crew of at least 5 individuals. More troubling was the reference to hull breach and repair procedures. Current Soviet spacecraft lacked the technical capability for in-flight hull repairs, yet the transmission suggested such procedures had been successfully completed. The technology described in the communication exceeded anything available to the Soviet space program in 1961. During the 12-minute transmission window, additional voices became audible in the background. These secondary communications appeared to be conversations between crew members, though the content remained largely unintelligible due to distance from the primary communication equipment. However, Dr. Petrenkov's analysis of these background conversations revealed disturbing elements. Voice stress analysis indicated multiple speakers in conditions of extreme psychological distress. Speech patterns suggested extended isolation and potential communication breakdown between crew members. Most unsettling were brief phrases that became audible during transmission pauses. References to surface contact and ground movement suggested the crew believed they were receiving some form of external communication or observation. Yet their described orbital position would place them hundreds of kilometers above Earth's surface, well beyond any possibility of surface-based interaction. When Volkov attempted response communication, the results differed dramatically from previous attempts. Instead of no response, the monitoring equipment registered what appeared to be reception acknowledgement from the source. A brief transmission confirmed ground control contact and requested detailed mission status information. Following established protocols, Volkov requested standard identification verification and mission parameter confirmation. The response provided information that existed nowhere in Soviet space program records, yet demonstrated intimate knowledge of actual program procedures and technical specifications. Cosmonaut Zero identified his mission as Deep Survey Operation Vanguard, launched from Baikonur on September 15, 1961. However, no such mission appeared in launch records for that date. September 15th had been designated a maintenance day with no scheduled launch activity. More significantly, the described mission parameters included objectives that exceeded Soviet technical capabilities by decades. Deep space exploration, extended life support systems, and advanced navigation technology represented goals for future program development rather than current operational capabilities. When Volkov requested crew identification, the response included names that appeared nowhere in cosmonaut program records. None of the 5 names provided matched any individuals currently enrolled in Soviet space training programs. Yet each name corresponded to standard Soviet naming conventions for the appropriate age demographic. Dr. Petrenkov's immediate analysis suggested 2 possibilities. Either the transmissions represented an extremely sophisticated deception operation by foreign intelligence services, or they documented actual activities occurring outside official program knowledge and oversight. The deception theory faced significant challenges. The level of technical knowledge demonstrated in the transmissions would require access to classified information available only to a small number of program personnel. Voice analysis confirmed consistent identity across all transmissions, suggesting a single individual rather than multiple operators attempting to simulate the same person. Furthermore, signal analysis indicated the transmissions genuinely originated from the described orbital positions. Equipment capable of generating such signals would require technology exceeding current Soviet capabilities, making foreign operation unlikely. The alternative explanation required accepting that actual human beings occupied orbital positions unknown to official program oversight. Such a scenario would necessitate launch capabilities, life support systems, and mission planning infrastructure operating parallel to the acknowledged program. Moscow's response to Dr. Petrenkov's analysis arrived through the highest security channels available to the space program. The classified directive restricted all information regarding the zero-frequency transmissions to a need-to-know basis and established additional monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union. More significantly, the directive authorized expanded investigation into launch records, personnel files, and equipment inventories for any irregularities that might account for unacknowledged orbital missions. The investigation scope included classified programs operating under separate authorization from the primary space exploration efforts. The expanded investigation produced disturbing results. Equipment inventory records showed discrepancies in launch vehicle components that could account for unacknowledged missions. Several rocket engines, fuel tanks, and guidance systems remained unaccounted for, despite being listed as delivered to Baikonur facilities. Personnel records revealed similar irregularities. 5 individuals had been assigned to specialized training programs in early 1961, but had been transferred to classified assignments before program completion. Their names matched exactly those provided by Cosmonaut Zero during the December transmission. The 5 cosmonauts had been identified as Vladimir Korolev, Sergei Volkov, Mikhail Petrov, Alexander Sokolov, and Dmitry Kozlov. All 5 men had demonstrated exceptional performance during initial training phases and had been selected for advanced preparation programs scheduled to begin in late 1961. However, according to personnel records, all 5 men had been reassigned to classified research programs in July 1961. No additional records existed regarding their current assignments or location. Their transfer orders bore the signature of officials whose authority exceeded normal program oversight. Equipment analysis revealed that sufficient launch vehicle components existed within Baikonur inventories to support an unacknowledged mission matching the parameters described in the zero-frequency transmissions. The required rocket assemblies, fuel supplies, and spacecraft components had been distributed among various classified programs, making detection of their coordinated use extremely difficult. Dr. Petrenkov's investigation also discovered irregularities in launch facility scheduling during September 1961. Launch Complex. 19 had been reserved for classified operations from September 13th through September 17th. With access restricted to personnel holding special authorization codes, Complex 19 was located in a remote section of Baikonur, separated from primary launch facilities by several kilometers of restricted terrain. Launch activities from this location would be invisible to standard observation points and could occur without alerting personnel at other facilities. Security records for Complex 19 during the September period remained classified under authority exceeding Dr. Petrenkov's clearance level. However, facility maintenance logs indicated unusual activity during the supposed maintenance period, including fuel delivery, equipment installation, and extended personnel presence. The investigation's most unsettling discovery emerged from analysis of communication logs during September 1961. Radio frequency allocations for September 15th included temporary assignments for frequencies matching those later associated with the zero transmissions. These frequency assignments had been authorized for deep space communication testing and remained active for an indefinite period. The authorization came from departments operating outside normal space program oversight, suggesting coordination between the unacknowledged mission and other classified operations. Dr. Petrenkov's report to Moscow included recommendations for expanded investigation and potential recovery operations. If the zero-frequency transmissions represented actual stranded cosmonauts, immediate action might be possible to establish communication and coordinate rescue efforts. However, the response from Moscow reflected priorities extending beyond individual rescue operations. Additional monitoring would continue, but active communication attempts were suspended pending further analysis of the situation's implications for program security and national defense. The final documented transmission from the zero frequency occurred on December 18, 1961. Dr. Petrenkov's team had maintained continuous monitoring for 2 weeks, recording intermittent communications that revealed increasingly desperate conditions aboard the supposed spacecraft. Previous transmissions had included routine mission reports and technical status updates. The December 18th communication abandoned all pretense of routine operations and became a direct plea for assistance from ground control. Ground control, this is Cosmonaut Zero with emergency transmission. Life support systems have failed in sections 3, 4, and 7. Crew members Korolev and Volkov are no longer responsive. Atmospheric pressure dropping rapidly throughout the vehicle. Request immediate emergency recovery protocols. The transmission continued for nearly 20 minutes, providing detailed information about system failures that painted a picture of catastrophic spacecraft malfunction. Oxygen recycling systems had apparently failed 3 days earlier, forcing the crew to rely on emergency reserves. Water reclamation systems had ceased functioning, leaving the crew with severely limited supplies. Most disturbing were the medical reports included in the transmission. Cosmonaut Zero described symptoms among the crew members consistent with advanced radiation exposure and decompression sickness. Yet the reported orbital altitude should have provided protection from dangerous radiation levels, and no hull breach had been reported severe enough to cause rapid decompression. Dr. Petrenkov authorized response communication during the December 18th transmission, hoping to provide technical assistance or guidance for emergency procedures. The conversation that followed confirmed the worst fears of the monitoring team. Cosmonaut Zero's responses to ground control questions revealed that the crew had been without reliable communication for over a month. They had received no response to previous transmissions and had assumed that equipment failure prevented ground contact. The realization that their communications had been received but not acknowledged appeared to cause significant psychological impact. When Dr. Petrenkov explained that no authorized mission matched their described parameters, Cosmonaut Zero's reaction suggested genuine confusion and distress. The cosmonaut insisted that their mission had been officially authorized and that ground control should have complete mission documentation. The conversation revealed that the crew believed they had been in orbital position for approximately 60 days, consistent with the September launch date. However, their description of mission objectives and technical capabilities continued to exceed acknowledged Soviet space program achievements. Most significantly, Cosmonaut Zero reported receiving what he described as external signals during their final week in orbit. These signals appeared to originate from Earth's surface, but used communication protocols unknown to the crew. The signals had caused considerable concern among the crew members, who interpreted them as possible evidence of hostile monitoring. Dr. Petrenkov's attempts to clarify the source and content of these external signals received unclear responses. Cosmonaut Zero described the signals as structured but non-standard and noted that they appeared to occur at regular intervals. However, the crew had been unable to decode or respond to the transmissions. During the final portion of the December 18th transmission, additional crew members became audible in the background. Their voices suggested extreme physical distress and psychological deterioration. References to ground contact and surface movement indicated the crew believed they were being observed or monitored by unknown parties. The transmission ended abruptly at 57 minutes after initial contact. Dr. Petrenkov's attempts to re-establish communication met with complete silence. All subsequent monitoring of the zero frequency detected only background static and routine atmospheric interference. In the days following the final transmission, monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union reported brief signal detections on related frequencies. These signals appeared to originate from orbital positions consistent with decaying spacecraft trajectories, suggesting the source was losing altitude and approaching atmospheric re-entry. However, no visual confirmation of spacecraft re-entry was ever documented. Optical tracking stations failed to detect any objects matching the projected trajectory, and no debris recovery efforts were authorized or conducted. Moscow's final directive regarding the zero-frequency transmissions classified all related documents under the highest security levels available to the Soviet government. Personnel involved in the monitoring operations required additional security clearance verification and signed expanded confidentiality agreements. Dr. Petrenkov's investigation was officially terminated on December 25, 1961. His final report was restricted to a small number of officials whose authority extended beyond normal space program oversight. No copies of the report were retained in standard program archives. The 5 cosmonauts identified by Cosmonaut Zero never returned to acknowledged space program assignments. Personnel records for Vladimir Korolev, Sergei Volkov, Mikhail Petrov, Alexander Sokolov, and Dmitry Kozlov were transferred to classified archives, and their current status remained unknown. Equipment irregularities discovered during the investigation were attributed to accounting errors and inventory management problems. Launch facility scheduling for Complex 19 returned to normal operations without acknowledgement of the September irregularities. Vladimir Petrov continued his monitoring duties at Building 7 until his retirement in 1968. His logbooks for November and December 1961 were removed from standard archives and classified under special authorization. Petrov signed additional confidentiality agreements and never discussed the zero-frequency transmissions with unauthorized personnel. Dmitry Volkov transferred to a communications position in Moscow in early 1962. His involvement in the zero-frequency investigation ended with the December termination directive. Volkov's subsequent career showed no connection to space program operations. Elena Kozlova remained at Baikonur until 1965, when she accepted a technical position with a classified research program. Her analysis reports regarding the zero-frequency transmissions were removed from program archives and transferred to special security storage. Dr. Alexander Petrenkov's investigation was his final assignment in space program communications. He transferred to a classified position with the Ministry of Defense in early 1962. His expertise in signal analysis and communication security proved valuable in other national defense applications. Building 7 continued operating as a primary communications facility for the Soviet space program. Enhanced monitoring equipment installed during the zero-frequency investigation remained in place and proved useful for subsequent mission support operations. However, personnel assigned to Building 7 reported occasional anomalous signal detections on frequencies related to the original zero transmissions. These signals appeared irregularly and lasted only seconds before fading into background noise. Attempts to analyze these brief signals suggested they might represent orbital debris or equipment malfunctions rather than active communication attempts. However, the frequency characteristics remained consistent with the 1961 zero-frequency transmissions. Some personnel theorized that spacecraft wreckage remained in orbital positions and occasionally transmitted brief signals when solar radiation interacted with damaged communication equipment. Such interactions could account for the irregular signal appearances without requiring active transmission sources. Alternative theories suggested that the monitoring equipment itself might be generating false signals under certain atmospheric conditions. Electronic interference from ground-based installations could potentially create signal patterns resembling the original zero-frequency characteristics. Dr. Petrenkov's classified research in 1968 included analysis of orbital debris and communication anomalies detected by various monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union. His findings suggested that unexplained signal sources remained active in orbital positions, consistent with the original zero-frequency transmissions. However, these findings were incorporated into broader research programs focused on space debris tracking and electronic warfare countermeasures. The connection to the 1961 zero-frequency incident remained classified and was not included in general research documentation. By 1969, monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union had detected similar signal anomalies on multiple occasions. The signals shared basic characteristics with the original zero-frequency transmissions, but lacked the clarity and duration necessary for detailed analysis. Some signals appeared to include voice communication elements, while others consisted entirely of digital data transmissions. The variety of signal types suggested multiple sources, rather than a single damaged spacecraft or equipment malfunction. Intelligence analysis of these later signals revealed disturbing patterns. Signal timing appeared to coincide with specific orbital positions and atmospheric conditions, suggesting systematic rather than random transmission activities. More significantly, voice analysis of signals containing speech elements detected multiple speakers using different languages. Russian communications were interspersed with English, German, and what appeared to be several other European languages. The multilingual nature of these communications suggested international space activities occurring outside official program oversight. However, no foreign space programs possess the technical capabilities necessary to support extended orbital missions during this period. Alternative explanations included the possibility that multiple nations were conducting classified space operations unknown to their respective civilian space programs. Such operations would require coordination and resource allocation exceeding acknowledged national capabilities. Dr. Petrenkov's final classified report in 1969 addressed the implications of continued signal anomalies for Soviet space program security. His recommendations included expanded monitoring, international intelligence coordination, and potential diplomatic investigation of unauthorized space activities. However, the response from Moscow indicated that broader political considerations prevented official investigation of potential international space operations. The signals would continue to be monitored, but active investigation remained restricted to technical analysis and threat assessment. The last documented reference to zero-frequency signals appeared in a 1969 technical memorandum regarding orbital debris classification systems. The memorandum noted that certain signal sources remained unidentified despite extensive analysis, but classified them as low-priority threats to current operations. Personnel who had participated in the original 1961 investigation were reassigned to other programs or retired from space-related positions. Their knowledge of the zero-frequency incident was considered too sensitive for continued involvement in routine space program operations. Vladimir Petrov retired to a small town in western Russia, where he worked as a radio repair technician until his death in 1978. His personal effects included detailed radio equipment and logbooks covering the period after his retirement from Baikonur. But these materials were removed by government officials before being released to his family. Dmitry Volkov continued his communications career in Moscow until retiring in 1975. He maintained contact with other Baikonur veterans, but never discussed classified aspects of his service. Volkov's family reported that he occasionally monitored radio frequencies as a hobby, but he never shared details of what he might have heard. Elena Kozlova's career in classified research continued until 1972, when she transferred to a teaching position at the Moscow Institute of Technology. Her expertise in signal analysis proved valuable in training future communication specialists, though her curriculum never included materials related to space program operations. Dr. Alexander Petrenkov remained involved in classified research until his retirement in 1974. His later work focused on electronic warfare and communication security applications that built upon his experience with space program signal analysis. The enhanced monitoring equipment installed at Building 7 during the 1961 investigation continued operating until the facility was modernized in 1973. When the older equipment was removed, technicians reported finding unusual modifications that had not been documented in official installation records. These modifications appeared to have been designed for monitoring specific frequency ranges and signal characteristics associated with the zero-frequency transmissions. However, no records existed explaining who had authorized or implemented these modifications. Analysis of the modified equipment revealed sophisticated signal processing capabilities that exceeded standard monitoring requirements for the Soviet space program. The modifications suggested that someone had anticipated the need for advanced signal analysis well before the zero-frequency incident occurred. Current personnel at Building 7 reported occasional equipment malfunctions that produced signal patterns reminiscent of the original zero-frequency transmissions. However, these incidents were attributed to aging electronics and electromagnetic interference from newer installations. The files and recordings related to the zero-frequency investigation were transferred to a special archive facility outside Moscow in 1975. Access to these materials required authorization from officials whose current positions and responsibilities remained classified. Periodic reviews of the zero-frequency materials were conducted by intelligence analysts, But no new information was released to space program personnel. The reviews focused on potential security implications rather than scientific or technical analysis. In 1978, a comprehensive analysis of Soviet space program anomalies was conducted by an international commission investigating unexplained orbital phenomena. However, the zero-frequency incident was not included in materials released to the Commission. Soviet representatives to the Commission reported that all significant space program irregularities had been resolved through improved procedures and enhanced oversight. No mention was made of ongoing signal monitoring or unresolved incidents from earlier program phases. The Commission's final report noted that several nations had experienced unexplained signal phenomena during early space program development, but concluded that most incidents could be attributed to equipment malfunctions or atmospheric interference effects. However, classified sections of the Commission's report included references to signal patterns that appeared to originate from orbital sources unknown to participating nations. These signals shared characteristics suggesting coordinated international phenomena rather than isolated national incidents. By 1980, monitoring stations throughout the Soviet Union had detected hundreds of brief signals sharing basic characteristics with the original zero-frequency transmissions. However, none of these later signals contained clear voice communications or extended transmission duration. Technical analysis suggested that multiple signal sources remained active in various orbital positions, but the sources appeared to be declining in signal strength and transmission frequency. Projected orbital decay calculations indicated that most sources would cease transmitting within the following decade. The Soviet space program's official position regarding unexplained signal phenomena emphasized that all significant incidents had been investigated and resolved. Routine monitoring continued to detect occasional anomalous signals, but these were classified as low-priority technical issues. However, personnel with access to classified monitoring data reported that signal detection rates had actually increased during the 1970s, with new sources appearing at regular intervals. The pattern suggested ongoing additions to orbital signal sources rather than gradual decline of existing sources. Dr. Petrenkov's final classified analysis in 1981 addressed the long-term implications of continued signal anomalies for space program security and international relations. His report recommended declassifying basic information about signal monitoring to enable broader scientific investigation. However, political considerations prevented implementation of Dr. Petrenkov's recommendations. The signals continued to be monitored under classified protocols, but no additional resources were allocated for active investigation or analysis. The most recent documented reference to zero-frequency signals appeared in a 1983 technical manual for space communications personnel. The manual included brief references to legacy signal sources and procedures for reporting unusual transmissions to appropriate authorities. Training materials for new communications personnel included general guidelines for handling unexplained signal phenomena, but provided no specific information about the historical context or significance of such incidents. By 1985, the original personnel involved in the zero-frequency investigation had all retired or transferred to non-space-related positions. Their replacements received basic training in signal monitoring procedures, but were not briefed on the historical background of specific signal types. The institutional knowledge regarding the zero-frequency incident gradually disappeared as newer personnel focused on current operational requirements rather than historical anomalies. References to the incident were removed from training materials and technical documentation. However, monitoring equipment continued to detect occasional signals sharing characteristics with the original zero-frequency transmissions. These signals were logged according to standard procedures, but were not subjected to detailed analysis or investigation. Some technical personnel reported that signal detection patterns appeared to follow orbital mechanics consistent with spacecraft in highly elliptical orbits. However, no visual confirmation of corresponding orbital objects was ever obtained. The absence of visual confirmation led to theories that signal sources might be highly classified spacecraft operating under special authorization, or alternatively, that the signals represented some form of natural phenomenon mimicking artificial transmissions. Recent analysis of archived signal data has identified patterns suggesting that multiple signal sources remain active in various orbital positions around Earth. However, the technical capabilities necessary to maintain such sources exceed acknowledged space program achievements of any known nation. The possibility that international cooperation enables secret space operations has been considered by intelligence analysts, but no evidence supports such coordination among nations that maintain competitive rather than cooperative space programs. Alternative explanations include natural phenomena that coincidentally produce signal patterns resembling artificial transmissions, or equipment effects that create false signal detections under specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions. However, the consistency and complexity of detected signal patterns make natural explanations unlikely. The signals demonstrate characteristics of intentional communication attempts rather than random, natural phenomena. Current monitoring procedures continue to detect signals sharing basic characteristics with the original 1961 zero-frequency transmissions. These signals appear at irregular intervals and remain active for brief periods before fading into background noise. Technical analysis indicates that signal sources continue to occupy orbital positions at various altitudes and inclinations around Earth. However, the number of active sources appears to fluctuate, with new sources appearing periodically while others cease transmission. The ongoing detection of unexplained orbital signals represents one of the most persistent mysteries of the space age. Despite decades of monitoring and analysis, the source and purpose of these transmissions remain unknown. Personnel currently assigned to space communications monitoring receive training in standard signal analysis procedures, but are not informed about the historical significance of specific signal types or frequencies. The institutional knowledge regarding the zero-frequency incident exists primarily in classified archives accessible only to personnel with special authorization. Current operational personnel focus on supporting active missions rather than investigating historical anomalies. However, some technical specialists have noted patterns in current signal detections that suggest connections to earlier incidents. These observations remain informal and are not included in official reporting or analysis procedures. The classified archives containing zero-frequency investigation materials remain sealed under the highest security classifications available to the relevant government agencies. Periodic reviews confirm that materials remain secure, but no new analysis or investigation has been authorized. Recent technological advances in signal analysis and space monitoring have provided capabilities that could enable more detailed investigation of orbital signal anomalies. However, policy decisions prevent application of these technologies to historical incidents. The families of personnel involved in the original zero-frequency investigation have received no information regarding their relatives' involvement in classified activities. Official records indicate standard space program service without reference to special assignments or security classifications. Attempts to research the backgrounds of the 5 cosmonauts identified in the zero-frequency transmissions have yielded no results. No personnel records exist for Vladimir Korolev, Sergei Volkov, Mikhail Petrov, Alexander Sokolov and Dmitry Kozlov beyond their initial training program assignments. The absence of subsequent records for these individuals remains unexplained. Standard procedures require maintaining personnel files throughout careers and after retirement or transfer. The complete disappearance of documentation suggests intentional removal rather than administrative oversight. Current space program personnel occasionally report detection of brief signals that appear to include voice communication elements. However, signal quality prevents detailed analysis, and the transmissions end before recording equipment can be properly configured. These contemporary signal detections share frequency characteristics with the original zero-frequency transmissions, suggesting potential connections to the 1961 incident. However, official procedures classify these signals as routine anomalies, requiring only basic documentation. The technical specifications of signals detected in recent years indicate transmission sources with capabilities exceeding current space program technologies. Signal strength, frequency stability, and transmission duration suggest advanced communication systems not available to acknowledged space operations. Some analysts have theorized that the signals represent testing of experimental communication technologies by classified research programs. However, no evidence supports the existence of programs with the necessary technical capabilities and operational scope. Alternative theories include the possibility that foreign space operations continue to occur outside official international oversight. However, the technical and financial resources necessary for extended orbital missions exceed the acknowledged capabilities of most nations. The most disturbing possibility is that the signals represent ongoing human presence in orbital positions unknown to official space program oversight. Such a situation would imply either massive oversight failures or intentional concealment of space operations. However, supporting evidence for sustained human presence in orbit remains limited to signal detection and analysis. No visual confirmation, debris recovery, or other physical evidence has been obtained despite decades of monitoring. The absence of physical evidence has led some analysts to conclude that the signals represent equipment effects or natural phenomena rather than active human communication. However, the complexity and consistency of signal characteristics challenge such explanations. Recent advances in space surveillance technology have provided capabilities for detecting and tracking orbital objects much smaller than previously possible. However, no objects have been identified that could account for the signal sources detected by monitoring stations. The discrepancy between signal detection and visual tracking suggests that signal sources either possess stealth capabilities exceeding known technologies or represent phenomena that do not correspond to conventional orbital objects. Current monitoring protocols continue to document signal detections but do not include provisions for active investigation or response communication. The signals are logged according to standard procedures and archived with other routine monitoring data. Personnel with access to historical monitoring data have noted that signal detection rates have remained relatively consistent over decades, with periodic increases during certain orbital configurations and atmospheric conditions. The persistence of signal detections over such extended periods suggests either extremely durable transmission equipment or ongoing maintenance and replacement of signal sources by unknown parties. The implications of either possibility challenge basic assumptions about space program oversight and international cooperation in orbital activities. Sustained orbital operations require resources and capabilities that should be detectable by current space surveillance systems. The ongoing mystery of the zero-frequency signals represents one of the most significant, unexplained phenomena in the history of space exploration. Despite extensive investigation and decades of monitoring, fundamental questions about the source and purpose of these transmissions remain unanswered. For those personnel who witnessed the original 1961 transmissions, the memory of Cosmonaut Zero's final desperate communications continues to haunt their understanding of humanity's ventures beyond Earth's atmosphere. The knowledge that human voices once called from the darkness of space, pleading for help that never came, serves as a sobering reminder that not all of our species' journeys into the cosmic void have ended in the triumph celebrated by official histories. The frequencies remain active, monitored continuously by equipment whose operators no longer understand the full significance of what they might hear. In the deep silence between stars, somewhere in the orbital paths that encircle our world, signals continue to transmit their mysterious messages to anyone with the equipment and authorization to listen. And perhaps, in the endless rotation of our planet beneath the cosmic darkness, those signals still carry voices, calling across the void, seeking the home that may no longer remember they ever left.